Good evening, YouTube. Melvin, Quant Geekery. First video in a long time, and wow. So, before we go into the studying for the CFA in August, I do feel like I should update on what has recently happened today, now that I'm done work. Yeah. Diamond is now in Chapter 11. That's not going to destroy the American comic book industry immediately. It will put more vulnerable, smaller companies into a bind. They pretty much have to go on to Lunar, or they need to go to Penguin Random House. I think Lunar has issues with scale, and these smaller publishers, because this is the simple reality, outside of the big cities, a lot of them are just not viable. I'm currently living in Wilmington, so you've got several colleges. So you either have to be a big city or you need to be college town. Other than that, it's going to be pretty rough. And because one of the ways that Marvel and DC have lowered their costs by increasing in efficiency was to invert the process of finding talent. In the past, they would develop talent, and then that talent would go into independent companies. However, the problem with that was creator-owned content theoretically could compete with established IPs. Namely, you could end up in situations where properties like Sandman were creator-owned, and frankly, DC/Warner Bros. Doesn't get as much of a cut. This new approach has the negative effect of basically you very rarely can make money as an independent creator-owned writer, artist. You're more or less slowly drifting into the orbit of Marvel and DC. Because you're not going to get the same upside as was possible with creator-owned, you're just constrained. I think it was during the height of the New 52 Batman era when Scott Snyder brings up the fact that Batman's selling 200,000 copies and his creator-owned project Witches at Image was selling about 30. He was making significantly more money with Witches than he was with Batman. And at that point, Batman was decisively the number one most consistent selling title. The only things that were really competing would be, independent events, number one issues, renumberings from Marvel for a high-end title. But the way Marvel operates, that those writers don't get any incentives for those first 6 issues. So they're just putting it in there, and they're not getting anything besides base page rate. So where are the new writers going to come from is the question. Where are the new artists going to come from? In the next, for those who remembered the old Comics and Finance account from 4 years ago, one of the things I said about when DC left is that Diamond was likely going to go bankrupt in 5 years. That wasn't actually a big deal. When they shut down due to the COVID and were just not really able to do things when things started reopening. That meant they had a balance of payments issue, that they had very little cash reserves. So I think it was like 3 months where everything was shut down, they basically ended up, that's what did it. And because they were just delaying for several more months, DC made the leap. And if Diamond were legitimately a well-run, solvent company, that would not have been an issue. That DC was not so large that Diamond could not survive necessarily. The problem is, if they weren't doing a good job when things were good, and the industry itself was becoming less stable, less growth oriented, basically in Five Forces terminology, it was a declining to terminal market. The actual stable growth was right in line with national income growth. Average income growth. So they were more or less just getting enough money from higher and higher income buyers, i.e. the collectors, to keep things going. This, of course, squeezes out smaller publishers. It drives out potential talent. It does a lot of bad things, but here's where I put my flag down. DC, Marvel, Diamond, they are all of a piece. A declining market is usually a result of an inefficiency. That inefficiency is excess market control. They're charging more, giving less, and squeezing a shrinking client base. At the end of the day, there's a Faustian bargain going on between big retailers and a monopsony distributor. And whenever there's a Faustian bargain, the side that gets screwed over is the devil. DC broke the Faustian bargain. DC is Faust. Diamond's the devil. Neither of them are good. But you need to accept the reality that Diamond, by its nature, exists to maximize profit. It maximizes profit by lowering cost or increasing revenue. But they're not the end consumer. They're not selling to a consumer. They're selling to comic shops. Well, the comic shops, if they can't increase their revenue, there isn't much of a point to having them around. So they can increase their yield. If they can lower their costs with all of the horrible things they were doing to comic shops, that in turn increased the number that were going out of business, that in turn squeezed the smaller publishers, so that they became even more dependent on that hard left college town group, in addition to the increasingly not hard left comic book collector audience, which in turn squeezes out smaller publishers, because if you don't have variants that people are interested in, if you don't have IP people are interested in, you just get squeezed out. So here we are. Crystal ball, things are going to get a lot worse for small publishers, and you will see a commensurate drop in quality across Marvel and DC outside of their big core titles. DC looks good right now because they need to get people in the door for what comes next. So expect the usual, 1.5 years of decent storytelling. And even though, wow. Wow. 5 years after Dan DiDio, they look like the good old days.